The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether or not your decision is appropriate for you. Property Investing Matters is brought to you by Destiny, empowering investors to achieve success through property investment for more than 24 years.
Hello and welcome to Property Investing Matters for another night of great property investing education. And as you can see, we're in lockdown again, and of course that means I'm in charge of the technology. So if things go wrong, it's me who you can blame, but we will be doing our best to still bring the show to you. Now I'm going to be here with you for around 45 minutes, not only bringing some valuable information, but answering all of your property investing questions as well. We have quite a few of them tonight. At any time during the show, you can email your question to be answered either this week or next if we don't get the time on the show tonight. Send those questions to pim@mypropertytv.com.au or pop them into a comment on my Facebook page. And when we answer it on the show, you will win one of my books. And this week, it's the 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. Now tonight, my special guest is the property professor, Peter Koulizos. He holds a teaching degree, a Masters of Business in Property, and a Masters of Urban and Regional Planning. He is currently the Program Director of the Master of Property at the University of Adelaide. Now, Peter's been teaching in real estate and investment for over 20 years. He's also a contributor to numerous newspapers, magazines, and websites. And he's sought after by TV and radio for his research and comments on the property market. On the show tonight, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Adelaide to find out what makes it tick and what Peter's expectations are for the future. Let's welcome Peter to the show tonight. Hi, Peter. How are you going?
I'm very good, thank you, Margaret. Thank you once again for the invitation to appear on your show.
Happily not in lockdown for you, but I guess with the rest of the country in lockdown, it probably feels like it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we've got family holiday planned for 2 weeks interstate. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to happen, but certainly we're revisiting almost where we were 12 months ago.
Yeah, it feels like it, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And I know we did many shows from lockdown at the time for quite a few months. So we're back there now, but that's fine. The show must go on.
Yep.
And here we are. Let's get started with some information about Adelaide. What's the general property situation like at the moment? What are you seeing?
So, Margaret, it's very similar to the rest of the country where property prices are moving extremely quickly. Property rents are increasing as well. What we're seeing is sometimes at auctions people paying much higher prices than expected. Now, I've been in property for a long time. I remember the good times of 2001, 2 and 3, but this is better than that. So people that have been in real estate for longer than me reckon that the 1970s was like this, where if a property was too expensive, you'd come back next week and then it would be market value. So it's something that I have really not witnessed before, and as a property owner, I'm a very happy man at the moment.
Yes, I bet you are, and we know that you own a fair amount of property in Adelaide, as do I. Let's look at some of the things that might be happening there. What's actually driving population and property growth, do you think?
Right, so the last year it's been pretty easy in that there hasn't been any interstate overseas migration. So that's not happening. But what is happening, and really as a result of COVID-19, is expats, those people that used to live in Adelaide or South Australia, that were working in Sydney and Melbourne, are coming back to South Australia to live. And COVID-19 has been the big catalyst for that. So what we've got is, even though generally South Australia loses more people to other states than gains, for the first time in almost 40 years that has changed, where more people are coming into South Australia from other states. And that has helped our overall migration because, as I said, South Australia South Australia has more people coming to it from overseas than leaving to go overseas. So we haven't had that advantage. So what we've got is more people coming to South Australia. All these people need somewhere to live. Generally, most of them will try and rent somewhere to try out different areas. But if they're familiar with Adelaide, then they've been earning big dollars in Sydney and Melbourne. They'll bring those dollars to Adelaide and think that they're getting very good value for money.
Pete, do you think there's an element of people from, say, Victoria who have been through, I think it's 4 lockdowns now, and they've been some 165 days in lockdown out of the year, which is a lot of days. Do you think there's an element of people who are living in and around Melbourne just thinking, look, I've had enough. South Australia seems to be a nice, safe state, doesn't lock down very often, doesn't have much COVID. I'm going to move there.
Yeah, well, look, just a personal example. There are 3 people that I know, good friends of mine, their children, who were living in Melbourne and during the lockdown came to Adelaide to work because working from home didn't matter if it was in the Melbourne suburbs or the Adelaide suburbs. And now 2 of those 3 are going to relocate here permanently. So that's just a small personal example, but I agree with you. It's just that they're just tired of the lockdowns. And I know Melbourne has lots to offer, but I mean, so does Adelaide. I mean, Australia, and in particular South Australia, has coped with COVID-19 very well, and it's a big attraction to people. Very big attraction.
Absolutely. Look, I think the overall figures, if you look at Adelaide overall and you see the reported growth figures, I think they really don't tell the truth about what's happening on the ground because, I know I've got some property there, as you know, down around Christie's Beach, and it's had a massive growth, particularly my Seaford property, just in a really short period of time. I mean, I literally woke up one day and went, oh my gosh, look at what the other houses next door are selling for all of a sudden. And it was like, it went from 300 to 360 almost overnight. And I think there are definitely pockets where that's happening in Adelaide.
Yeah, so, look, and like I've got some property in neighbouring Port Noarlunga South, and I bought the land there to develop three years ago for 675. One of my past students bought a similar property on the Esplanade, just up the road from me, for just over $1 million. Now, I know that's only one property, but just your example, my example, and what I can see properties are selling for today as compared to only 4 or 5 months ago is just phenomenal. And that's not just the southern suburbs, it's also the inner city suburbs. It's happening, all over the place.
Yeah, I think rents are also really being impacted. Again, another personal example, a property that I built on the back of a block that I already had in Christie's Beach that we had an expectation of getting around $360 a week rent. When it was finished, we actually achieved $415, which was a big difference to expectations.
Yeah, look, the 2 most recently rented properties that we've got, on both occasions, the tenant offered more than we were asking. And that's happened over the last several months, not just to me, but to many other people as well.
Is there anything that you can see happening on the horizon in Adelaide that you think might support this demand going forward? Obviously, when investors decide to invest, sometimes they see things happening and get in and it's a little bit too late. Do you think the future picture is still looking pretty good for people who still want to get into Adelaide?
Yeah, look, this whether you call it a boom or just an upward movement in the market, it's up to you. But this is going to continue well into next year. And I think the big drivers are, we can talk about the defence contracts and the growing medical precinct, but I think lifestyle is a big thing, which was given a big tick last week by The Economist, where Adelaide was the 3rd most livable city in the world. Obviously the most livable city in Australia, according to The Economist, but the 3rd most livable city in the world. And a lot of that has to do with the way that South Australia dealt with COVID-19. So the examples that I gave before, people coming back from the large metropolises of Sydney and Melbourne to settle in Adelaide, those people that have never been to Adelaide or South Australia are now considering it, And when we're talking about investors, I'm hearing from buyers agents and real estate agents, the amount of phone calls and inquiries they are getting from Sydney and Melbourne investors on Adelaide property is just phenomenal. Because just like Sydney and Melbourne prices have gone up a lot, and that might be out of their price range, they look over to Adelaide, they hear that we're the most livable city, we've dealt with COVID-19 pretty well, and you can buy a good property down in those southern suburbs and a house, not an apartment or a flat, for 400,000, 450,000.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly, great living as well. Nice coastal living there. Look, let's get a little bit deeper into specific areas. We've talked now about the southern suburbs. It's been a favourite of mine for a long time. It's taken longer than I'd hoped to get moving, but it's definitely on the move now. What about the northern suburbs up toward, obviously not into the Barossa, but up toward the Barossa, where formerly we have a lot of lower socioeconomic areas? Are any of those now showing some signs of growth?
Yeah, so the growth is very widespread, but the thing you've got to watch out for is you don't want to be going into areas where there is potential a huge supply of land that can be subdivided in the future. So if there is a limited supply and you can buy into that area, great. Whereas, say, across the highway, there might be a new subdivision. That's not where I would encourage you to go. Look for established homes in established areas. That's where I would be going.
We're certainly seeing it, even up into areas like Manopara, Salisbury. We're definitely seeing a lot of growth happening there too, Peter.
Yeah, look, whether you're living close to the city, long way from the city, close to the beach, up in the Adelaide Hills, McLaren Vale, Barossa Valley, the regional areas, again, lifestyle. We talked about coming from Sydney to Adelaide for lifestyle, but there are people going from Adelaide to the regional areas for lifestyle, just like they are going from Melbourne to the Surf Coast for lifestyle, or Sydney to the Central Coast, or Brisbane to the Gold Coast.
Now, this is a question that you probably can't really answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think there's an actual boom coming to Adelaide?
What's your definition of a boom, Margaret? What's the number?
Well,
is it 20%?
No, definitely not 3. I think, a boom of the 10% variety plus that we see happening in Sydney and Melbourne sometimes.
Yep. Well, at the moment, CoreLogic is saying that for the last 12 months, Adelaide property prices have gone up 14%, but the last 6 months have had much greater property price growth than the previous 6 months. So if we're looking at the calendar year 2021, Adelaide property prices will increase very close to 20%.
Okay, well, that's good to know for anyone who's down there. The thing about Adelaide I've always found is that it's always grown a little bit every year, but really if you look at over the longer terms of say 20 years, it still really keeps pace with the major capitals, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I actually did a little bit of research, Margaret, so I'm just going to have a quick look at my computer screen.
Okay, great. I love it when you do research.
And I looked at a paper which was called Housing Prices in Australia 1970 to 2003, so 33 years of data. And what we've got, Sydney is the standout, but I want to come back to Sydney, where property prices increased 16 times in that 33-year period. In Melbourne, 13 times. Brisbane, 13 times. Adelaide, 13 times. So the other cities were very similar. But, you can work out, I'm sure you know, Margaret, you can pick the data to support your own argument. But if I look at, say, the most recent period, and if I look at the last 18 years, then Sydney has been the worst performer, but Brisbane had, in that 18-year period, increased 165%, Adelaide 150%, Perth 151%. So really a much of a muchness. It all, Margaret, with stats, it all comes down to which time period you pick.
Absolutely.
And which argument you want to support.
Look, the argument that I really want to support for our viewers is that providing you do the research and you don't go and pick, a random area that's got a lot wrong with it, then so long as you satisfy some fundamentals, and Adelaide has the fundamentals, and then realise that you're going to sit for quite some time on this property, if that's your plan to create a retirement income, then Adelaide is going to perform for you pretty well as the next capital city over the time period, so long as you start early enough and sit, long enough for it.
Yeah, and location is critical. So we're talking about Adelaide here as a capital city, but it's also the suburb, because some suburbs or towns do better than other suburbs or towns. And then we've also got housing styles. I know you're going to ask me a question a little bit later on in the show about property types and what's specific about Adelaide. Adelaide, like Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, we love our old character period style homes. So buying one of those sorts of properties in a particular suburb is in theory, you'll have better potential capital growth than if you bought, say, a house that was built 10 years ago that might even be right next door to that particular property. So it's the right type of property in the right location. That's what you've got to be looking for.
Not me. I don't like the old houses. I go for the
No,
new
you don't, do you?
Only because I know how much trouble
Yes,
they bring you. And as an owner occupier, you can deal with the trouble. But as an investor, I'm not buying it, I'm afraid.
I understand where you're coming from.
Look, let's go back to the South Australian regions. You mentioned the regions that some people are moving out to them now looking for that lifestyle. Can you get a little bit more specific and tell me which regions are actually showing the most interest at the moment?
Yeah, so the biggest one is the Fleurieu Peninsula. So the Fleurieu Peninsula is Melbourne's equivalent to the Surf Coast or Bellarine Peninsula or Mornington Peninsula, Sydney's Central Coast, Brisbane's Gold Coast. So it's about an hour away from Adelaide. Many people have holiday houses there, but more and more people are living there and commuting to Adelaide. So the towns that I'm talking about include Port Elliot, Hayborough, Victor Harbor, and Counter Bay. One thing they all have in common is that they are all on the coast. So in my opinion, if you're going to move to a regional area, the sea change is stronger than the tree change. And if you are going to do a sea change, the closer you can buy a property to the sea, the better off you're going to be for capital growth. For example, this is an extreme example, a house on the Esplanade will cost you a lot more, but for a number of reasons, that should grow more in value than, say, something that's 7, 8 or 9 streets back with no view of the water.
Okay, so does that really sum up all the things you should be looking for if you're buying in Adelaide? Potentially a character home. I know Adelaide people love them, potentially near the coast. What about being closer to the city? Is that of value to people in Adelaide, or is most of Adelaide close enough for that not to be a feature?
Most of Adelaide is close enough to the CBD, but most of the character homes are close to the city because it makes sense. Adelaide was settled by white men in 1836. So where did they build houses? As close as they could to the city centre and the River Torrens. And then as time wore on, they built them further and further out. So one of the reasons that being close to the city is important is because that's where your highest concentration of character homes are.
All right, well, look, Peter, we do have a lot of questions for tonight. And if you're watching from home and you have a question about any aspect of property investing, then send an email to pim@mypropertytv.com.au or just simply pop your question into a comment on my Facebook page. And for your efforts, each caller or sender of a viewer question that we answer will receive a copy of the 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. That this is, of course, a book about the important criteria that you need to have in an area and property before you buy it to make it a good investment. When we come back from this very short break, we'll be talking more about Adelaide and what's happening both in the city and in the regions. Don't go away. We will be right back. Welcome back to Property Investing Matters, free and on demand on My Property TV. I'm Margaret Lomas, and joining me is the property professor, Peter Koulizos, and we're discussing the Adelaide property market. Remember that you will receive a copy of my book, 20 Must-Ask Questions for Every Property Investor, if we answer your viewer question on the show tonight. So just send me an email to pim@mypropertytv.com.au or pop along to Facebook, where you can put your question into a comment on any of my Facebook posts. Pete, before we go to the viewer questions, a question that I did want to ask you about Adelaide is, if you were a property investor and you didn't have a huge amount of money, you didn't want to be spending $600,000 and $700,000, and you're looking at around the $300,000 to $400,000 mark, where do you think they could be investing right now?
Okay, so in my opinion, if you've got $400,000, I'd be looking to buy a house on some land in the suburbs between Christie's Beach and Aldinga Beach. So for $400,000, you'll get a house that was built in the 60s or 70s on about 700 square metres of land. If you've got less than that, but you've got around $300,000, then I'd be buying one of those old 2-bedroom cream brick units that were built in the 60s in suburbs close to the city. But if you're going to buy a unit in a small group of units, so in a group of no more than 8 units, ideally the unit on the ground floor, because it has greater accessibility, therefore more appeal to people. And you either ideally buy the front unit, which has presence to the street, or the rear unit, which is the closest. The closest.
Great advice. As you know, I own a block in Prospect, which we did up. It was one of those older cream brick unit blocks, which we did up, and again did very well from that in terms of the increased rent and better quality of tenant and a whole lot of things that made that a very good idea to do. So I must thank you for that, because it was your suggestion. So.
But Margaret, you're in a great suburb. You're in a great street. All right, they were 60s units, but now they don't look like 60s units. Yeah. So people are happy to pay you a premium because they are properties that have been done up very nicely. So rent, your return on your investment for, the money that you spend on renovation is just fantastic. And that's just going to hold you in very good stead for the long term because you're in a great location.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's go to these viewer questions. And the first one tonight comes from Ryan. And Ryan asks, "Hi, Margaret and team. I hope you're all well. I was hoping you could provide your view on Port Kennedy in WA and what growth drivers do you see for this area? Do you believe the recent capital growth experienced in this area will continue, or whether you feel the best time to invest in this area is now behind us?" Pete, I don't know what you know about Port Kennedy.
Well, Margaret, remember this book that I wrote 13 years ago?
Yes.
Port Kennedy is in here, actually.
Fabulous. And what did you say 13 years ago?
So I said some of the best areas are adjacent to the golf course and to the northwest of Port Kennedy, where there is easy access to the beach. And for me, the big driver was the improvements to infrastructure between Mandurah and Perth, which is where Port Kennedy is, which was going to be the big driver. Look, I haven't been to Perth for a long time. I know you're supposed to be there right now, Margaret, but can't be there. So you probably have more up-to-date information. But certainly, look, I picked that as one of the top 20 suburbs in Perth all those years ago. If I was to write the book again, most of the suburbs that I'd written about would be in there again, because suburbs take a long time to either gentrify or renew. But to be honest, I haven't been there for probably 6 or 7 years. So I'm sure you've got more updated information than me, Margaret.
Yes, I do. In fact, one of the things about Port Kennedy is that if I was going to buy there now, I would definitely buy, but it has come through a period like all of Perth where it hasn't been performing overly well. So I'm not sure if you're asking this question because you're wondering whether to hold or whether to buy. But back in January 2017, the median price of a property in Port Kennedy was $390,000. By the end of the year, it was only $367,000. Now, before you think that looks like it plunged, it could also have something to do with the fact that there definitely was new land releases and some new estates that might have sold a little over market value. But since that time, it's pretty well sat very, very quietly. And as of March this year, the median price is only $369,000. So that area, if you've held it over the last couple of years, hasn't been performing as well as you might have liked it to. However, the good news is that it is now starting to come back. And one of the things that we're seeing happening in Perth, which is often the way when an area has sat flat for a long time and then starts to recover, is that you generally see the recovery occurring in those lower priced, more affordable suburbs first, as first home buyers then get into the market and then start to look at buying, and they push those prices up. So we do actually have a fairly good result with this area now starting to get more hits on realestate.com, showing more interest, and I do expect that we're going to see a fairly big difference in the price in another year's time as it starts to recover. The other thing that's happening in Port Kennedy as well is that we did have a lot of vacancy in the area, but now those vacancies are beginning to be mopped up, and our vacancy rates are very, very low in Port Kennedy and all of the surrounding areas there. So I think it's probably one to keep if you've got it. If you're looking to buy a property at the moment, it's definitely an area that I would consider. There are probably other areas a little closer to Perth that I would look at first before I looked at Port Kennedy though. But if you are looking at buying in Port Kennedy, or if you already have a property in Port Kennedy, it's definitely not one to sell right now. Let's go to our next question, and it's from Sim, and Sim says, "Hi Margaret, thanks so much for your ongoing real estate articles. They've been most helpful. I have two quick questions regarding capital gains tax, which I hope you can answer. I bought a property in 1988 as my primary residence. It was rented out till July 1999 and recently sold. Do I get a retrospective valuation for 1999 to work out the cost base? Will I be better off using the discount method or indexation method to calculate the gain? I look forward to your reply and any comments you can share." Well, Pete, neither you nor I are tax advisors at all. But have you got some input for Sim?
Yes, well, I went and spoke to my accountant, so I do have some information. It looks like you will need to get a retrospective valuation, and I would encourage you to go to the ATO website. So my accountant sent me a link to this. So if you Google ATO, using your home to produce income, you'll get a lot of information. I mean, not all of it's going to be relevant to your particular situation, but certainly what you're talking about is in that particular on that particular web page. So that's ATO, using your home to produce income. In regards to the discount method or indexation, you really need to seek professional advice. For most people, the discount method works best. So that is claiming a 50% discount on your capital gain generally works best, but you need to see your own accountant for your own particular situation.
Now, let me add to that as well, Sim, that if you moved out of your primary place of residence and didn't have another one, then you would have had a 6-year period where there's no capital gains tax applying. At the end of that 6-year period, then the capital gains tax will begin accruing. Unless during that time you did have another principal place of residence, which you may have done, in which case you can actually nominate which place of residence you want that principal place of residence exemption over. So it might be in your best interest to leave the principal place of residence exemption over the property you moved out from for the 6 years, depending on how quickly it grew, as compared to one you might have moved into and owned, and compared to how quickly that grew. And your accountant can definitely do those figures for you, so you can work out which is the best place for your principal place of residence, and they can also work out for you what kind of capital gains tax that you're going to be paying. This is a really good lesson, I think, for viewers to understand that before you move out and rent out a property that you once lived in, you really need to consider all the circumstances, because I've rarely found it better, unless someone has to keep their property for some reason. But if you're planning to move on to another property and live somewhere else, I've rarely found it a better bottom line proposition to keep your old house and rent it out than to sell it, use the money on the home that you're moving into, and then borrow back again against your new home and buy somewhere else, because people miss all of this stuff with capital gains tax and don't realise that, you know, the property may not grow as well as they'd like. It might not be in a hotspot. It might not be the best thing. If you are thinking of moving out of your own home and renting out that home while you move on to something else, please get some good advice from an accountant. Find out whether the area that you're moving out from is actually a hotspot or not before you go ahead and do it.
Margaret, can I also add, people need to be careful with their own home. Some people think that they can knock it down, build to, and, you know, make a lot of money. And you might, but you'll also be paying a lot of tax, because you will lose the capital gains tax exemption that your home is your principal place of residence. Because if you sell that property at a profit and it's your own home, you pay no tax. As soon as you turn it into a commercial venture and you want to subdivide and build, then you'll be paying tax on the whole lot. So as you said, Margaret, get yourself some professional tax advice before you either move out or demolish your own home.
Before you do anything, in fact. It's a little bit late after the horse has bolted, and the tax office doesn't like the argument that you just didn't know or didn't understand. It doesn't work, unfortunately. Our next email is from Robbie, and Robbie says, "Hi Margaret, I have most of your books and especially liked The Truth About Positive Cash Flow. I'm very interested in your line of credit loan you set up in the book. If I understand it correctly, you have only one large loan set up in the form of a line of credit which covers your home loan, investment property loans and all of your expenses. Is this correct? Also, do you have an offset account against your home loan? I have my home loan with Bank A, 560,000 mortgage with about 40,000 equity. I have an interest-only investment property loan with Bank B, 250,000 loan with 240K available equity. How should I set this up as a line of credit? I'm 30 years old and want to purchase 10 properties." Well, of course, Pete, when I wrote that book, which is a long time ago now, the line of credit was the best option, but it's not necessarily so anymore.
Right, so Margaret, you're the queen here so far as this is concerned. I have a couple of offset accounts. I don't actually have I do have one line of credit, but more offset accounts, and I find that the offset accounts are more beneficial, but you are the expert, so I'm also very keen to hear your answer.
Well, in the olden days when I wrote that book, which feels like the olden days now because it was a long time ago that I did write that book, the use of offset accounts weren't as prominent, and that's mainly because the way an offset account used to work is that an offset account meant that whatever you had in your offset account, there was an interest payment made on that, but it was made in the form of an extra repayment into your own home loan, which wasn't that good a system really, because you didn't make much interest on them and it only made a little bit of an extra repayment. Offset accounts have now changed so that whatever money you keep in an offset account, say it's 20,000, then that's 20,000 you don't pay interest on in your home loan, and that's a much better system. The way a line of credit always used to work, and lines of credit in the olden days were priced the same as a normal home loan, is you had one loan, but you could split it up into all different accounts to represent your different properties. So it made it easy at tax time. It's very easy accounting. You didn't have everything all lumped into the one loan together so that an accountant had to do the tricky calculations for you. You had your loan all split up into different accounts, and pretty much that's how it worked. It doesn't work like that so much anymore, and lines of credit tend to be priced higher than your normal loans and your investment loans. And I see this week that some banks are now pricing investment loans back down to the same price as a home loan again. So now's a great time to be borrowing, and I think a better way to go is the way that Peter has just mentioned, which is now to have the best loan that you can possibly get on each property with a linked offset account where you keep your funds. You don't need to have an offset account against every property unless you've got more funds in one offset account than it's offsetting. Because at the end of the day, at tax time, all debt is one debt, all interest is one interest, and all income is one income. So it doesn't matter which loan you're saving that interest on, except for it needs to be the loan with the highest interest rate. So lines of credit, not so much anymore, but definitely split up your loans and get those offset accounts against them. If you need some help, Robbie, with that, happy to help you out. Just drop me a line. Next question comes from Roy, and it's a nice quick one for you, Peter. Do house prices get affected in suburbs where there are low sales volumes? I guess we have to ask the question why there are low sales volumes.
So, I mean, Adelaide's a very good example because Adelaide's a pretty small city with some very small suburbs. So when I was doing the research for that book, it wasn't uncommon to see population of 20 to 30,000 in suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne, but in Adelaide, they were commonly 4,000 or 5,000. So to get back to the question, yes, a low number of sales can distort the median price. For example, I'll pick an extreme example. If we're in a beachside suburb, and let's say in one quarter, in one 3-month period, let's say it's summertime, the only 3 houses that are sold are on the Esplanade. But then maybe 6 months later in the wintertime, the only 3 houses or 4 houses that are sold are back from the beach. What you will have, because there were very few sales, because one, it's a relatively small suburb, is you will think that, my goodness, property prices have dropped significantly. But it's not that at all. It's because they were in different locations and there was such a small number of sales. Whereas if this suburb had 20 sales in a quarter, it's very unlikely that all 20 would be on the Esplanade. So that would give you a much better picture of what was happening.
It's a fabulous example, actually, Pete, because we often see cases of suburbs where part of a suburb might be a lot better located than another part of a suburb. And if you get a couple of properties in those higher price brackets selling where nothing else is sold, then suddenly it looks like the prices have skyrocketed when in fact they really haven't at all. It's just those high priced properties that are sold. But what I would say to Royden is, if there are low sales volumes in a suburb, ask the question, why are there those low sales volumes? Is it because people aren't wanting to live there and therefore houses aren't selling? And if that's the case, look for the underlying reasons behind that. Because one of the things that my book will tell you, and you'll be getting a copy of that, is that there are many factors that drive growth, and those factors need to be present in the areas that you buy in order for your investment property to be successful. So some areas with low sales volumes, they have low sales volumes because they're either undesirable suburbs or they might have something else about them that makes them difficult for now. It could be a long commute. There could be not much infrastructure, no bus routes or train routes. There could be a lot of reasons around that. But then you need to do further research, because it could also be an area that's got a lot of those things coming up, which will make their fortunes turn around and make it a suburb that does have higher turnover. So there's 1,000 reasons why an area might not be selling, and your job as a property investor is to find out what they are. Next question is a pretty long one, Peter. I hope you're ready for this.
I have seen it.
And Lily says, hi, my partner has been with me for approximately 10 years and he's not very good with money. It's unfortunate, Lily. He hasn't lived with me until quite recently, and now that he's moved in full time, I want to make sure that my assets are protected. I believe it will cause too much commotion if I ask him to sign a prenup type agreement, so I'm seeing what my options are. I'm looking into the possibility of transferring the ownership of my residential property into my 3 children's names. There's a P&I mortgage on my principal place of residence, and if a transfer of title to my children's names were possible, with no changes to the repayments from a bank account, would this work? The initial outstanding loan balance was $89,000. A redraw facility of $78,000 was added to the loan when refinancing, and that's been put towards the purchase of an investment property. Is this a possible solution? And if so, what would be the implications for myself and my children? And what other avenues would you recommend? Pete, well, it sounds to me like Lily does have a little bit of a problem. And I think what she's saying in the email is that she would transfer the title to her children's names, but continue to live in the property and pay the mortgage.
Okay, so there are a number of implications here. Firstly, I would encourage Lily to get some legal and tax advice. From a tax perspective, if you transfer the property from yourself to your children, you are going to trigger a capital gains tax event, assuming you've made a capital gain. So simple numbers, if you bought it for 200 and you're going to, and now the market, doesn't matter what you sell in quotation marks.
Pete, this is her principal place of residence.
Oh, this is her principal place of residence.
No capital gains tax will apply.
Okay, so there'll be no capital gains tax. That's very good. Okay, but there will be stamp duty. So the transfer will attract stamp duty. And the other thing you need to worry about, and I understand the process that you're going through, because I have 4 children and I'd like to protect my assets and also the assets that I give to my children. It's not just like at the moment, it's your partner that doesn't do well with money. There's no guarantee that the partners of your children are going to be fantastic with money, and that particular relationship is going to last forever. So what you might find is if you put the property into the three names, one of your children hooks up with somebody else, they need to split up, well, then that partner also has a share in the house. One simple measure could be transfer the property into the children's name, keep the mortgage in your name, so if something does go wrong with your children, then at least you know that there is a mortgage there and they need to pay out that portion of the mortgage.
Except that she can't transfer the property into the children's names and keep the mortgage, because she has to be a title holder to have that mortgage.
That's true, unless she's got some other security. Very true. Okay.
Yeah, and once, Lily, there's a lot of holes in your strategy. If you want to transfer into your children's names, as Peter says, there's stamp duty to pay, and the stamp duty has to be at the market value. So each of them will pay stamp duty on the portion that they're getting. Or if you're transferring it as a whole, obviously with the kids all on the title, there'll be a stamp duty to pay on that market value. You can't keep the same mortgage. They'll have to get a mortgage of their own. If you want to be on that mortgage, you would have to be guarantor. You'd probably get a guarantor situation through the bank, though, because the benefit to you is that you're living in the property. Normally, banks don't like taking parents as guarantors for kids' loans unless there's a benefit to the guarantor. In this case, the benefit is that you're living there. But their names would have to be either on the mortgage or they would have to be guarantors on the mortgage, and your name would have to stay on the title if that's the case. So you can't have a mortgage in your name unless your name is somewhere on that title. So all of that is very, very messy. I understand what you're trying to achieve, and I think there is a simple way that you can achieve this, and that is for you to set up in your will a testamentary trust. And a testamentary trust is created by your death. And when you die, the assets that you specify go directly into the testamentary trust, and you can nominate your three children as the beneficiaries, and then they get the property. So that's probably the clearest and cleanest way. You need to seek legal advice about that, because I'm also not a lawyer, but a testamentary trust is, I understand, a good way. It doesn't cost you money to set up now because you're not setting up the trust yet. The trust is created by your death. So there's no tax liabilities now while you're alive, which is what makes a testamentary trust so good. You don't have to set up one now and have all the costs of that. Your estate sets it up once you die, and therefore any assets that you specify go directly into that trust. You can put your investment property in there as well, and the kids get it then. And the trust deals with it. They'll pay out the loan, they'll sell the property, and the remainder of, or the balance will all stay in that testamentary trust to be distributed to the children at the wishes of the executor of that trust, or the trustee of that trust. So that sounds to me like probably the best way to go.
Once again, Margaret, you answered that question beautifully. So that's why you have a property TV show and I don't.
Yeah, well, I've been around a long time now, and you know a lot about property, Pete, but I know you don't deal a lot in lending and that kind of thing. So that makes it a lot harder, I think, too. It's a tricky question. Okay, let's go to the next one from Phil. And Phil, another long one. This is right up your alley, though, Pete. I'm relying on you to answer this.
No problem here.
Question completely. Hi, Margaret and Peter. I have a 70s 3-bed house on 840 square metres in Morford Vale, which I bought very cheaply in 2017. Built to the front of the lot, positively geared. It has a huge backyard, not a corner block, with good access to the rear. I am considering building a second house at the rear of the property, which would require approval for a hammerhead lot, also known as a battle axe in other states. With a buy and hold strategy, this will create even better cash flow, which suits me at the moment. I'm also considering a second option, demolishing the existing house and dividing into equal halves and building 2 new 4-bed houses. This, I believe, would bring the best future capital gains, which is not my primary short-term goal, but also a strong cash flow in the meantime, but obviously it requires more capital. Which option do you think is better? Personally, I don't like hammerhead lots, but I'm doing this for the best investment outcome, and there seems to be several similar developments scattered around the suburb. And before you answer it, Peter, we should point out that our book, which will be out very soon, is
By
the
Christmas?
book for Phil.
Yes.
Called Diary of a Small Developer, and it really deals with all of this about, is it worthwhile demolishing an existing house and building more, or is it better to keep the house and build on the back of a block? We went through all of that in this book.
Yeah, we did. That's very good, Margaret. But Phil probably can't wait till the book comes out, so I'll just give you a brief overview, Phil. Luckily, I know Morphett Vale quite well because I'm very keen on neighbouring suburbs of Christie's Beach and Port Noarlunga. Firstly, hammerheads are not a good option in the cheaper areas like Morphett Vale unless it's a brand new house at the front and say 2 at the back. But I think if you drive around the streets of Morphett Vale, Phil, I don't think you'll find too many of those older 70s houses at the front and new houses at the back. You'll find that in more expensive suburbs, but not in Morphett Vale. The other one is, I could almost guarantee that if you're going to knock down that house, it is not worth just splitting it into 2. This is exactly the process that Margaret and I went through with her property in Christie's Beach, which is the subject of the book. And it just wasn't worth it. It's just better off to sell as it is with the house on it than to just chop it up into 2. I'm currently looking at doing some development in Christie's Beach, and I'm finding unless you can chop up the block into at least 4, there's just no money in it. You'd be better off just selling it and then looking for another development site. So Phil, in a nutshell, I wouldn't be doing a hammerhead, and I definitely wouldn't be knocking down the house to build 2 new houses. You would be losing money.
It's also a lot more expensive, Bill, with the holding costs. You know, if you're knocking down a property, you've got no income coming in. It takes a lot longer to build 3 or 4 than it does to build 1. You've got no income coming in. You've got to add all of that, and then there's the risk that they're not going to be, or you won't have enough equity in at the end. And I know the development that we did where we wanted to build 4 but weren't allowed. We were told we could do 3. If we did 3, we needed to knock down the existing perfectly good house, even though it is an older house, which we didn't do in the end. But even if we had done it, I know that the final outcome would not have been as good as the outcome we got, which was to leave the tenant in the front house, and they stayed in there while we built on the back of the block. We built that second house back there. The second house is worth a fair bit of money now, a lot more than we'd expected, and the whole outcome ended up being really quite good. So, but Pete says hammerhead doesn't like the hammerheads. Yeah, look, maybe build 2 units at the back instead if they'll let you do that. But keep that front house, I think, if you can. 2 more questions to go, Peter. Next one from Wade. Wade says, "Hi, Margaret. I've been a long-time follower and a fan of your books. I was wondering what is the best method or things to look out for when choosing insurance for an investment property. I understand that there are landlord, building insurance and rent insurance. Do you recommend both? I live in Queensland and I have an investment house and duplex. I'm currently using Terry Shear. I had a look on some online comparison website. What are your thoughts around these?" Don't really want to be recommending different companies because, Peter, what I've discovered, because I've got properties everywhere, I've discovered that, you know, one company could be great for one property, and then in another suburb, it's just out of the ballpark compared to other companies as well.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. Like, I'm not here to recommend a particular company over another, but I can just give you my personal point of view on what we do. We have building and contents insurance. I think, Wade, you may have got the terms mixed up, but we have building and contents insurance on our investment property. So if something goes wrong with the building, it's damaged, or there is a fire, or even something happens inside the building and it's damaged. But we also have landlord's insurance. So if there's rent default, there's rent loss. So we do have both types of insurances on all of our investment properties. And that really came to the fore when COVID-19 hit us March last year. I was on the phone making sure that all of our insurance policies were up to date, because back then the thought was that, you know, the sky was going to fall in, tenants would leave all the rental properties and we'd be left without tenants. That didn't eventuate, but still it was a good lesson for me to make sure all the properties had their insurances paid up and up to date.
Wade, I do caution you to be very careful because insurance companies are being a bit tricky at the moment, and they're starting to use terminology that confuses the buyer of the insurance. You referred to landlord building insurance, and I noticed the other day when I was shopping around for some of my insurances that some companies are actually using that as a term now to confuse people. Building insurance that comes for a landlord is only exactly the same as any old building insurance. So for your building, go for the best quote that you can get with the best inclusions, including a low excess and some of those extra things that you might want added to the building. The fact that it's called landlord building insurance doesn't make it any different than a normal building insurance policy. What you want is a rent default or a loss of rent landlord's insurance policy that covers you for loss of rent. Now, I've discovered also that there are quite a number of companies not covering for rent default at the moment. So it's very important that you ask the question, are you covering for rent default? When COVID hit, many insurance companies dropped the old rent default. So what they were actually covering you for under a landlord's rent insurance policy is damage by the tenant. They leave, there's not enough money in the bond to cover any damage that they've done, then the policy will cover that. But a lot of them aren't covering for that rent default. So make sure that you get a building policy plus a rent default policy that also covers you for all of the other things that are related to your rent. That's the most important thing. Last question. A lot of them tonight, Peter. Always get a lot when you come on. This one's from Ben, and Ben says, "Hi, Margaret. My local real estate agent mentioned that they can either rent out my house or do an Airbnb since I am and will be working in a different state for a few years. My house is not far from tourist spots. Are there any tips or things that I should be aware of when asking a real estate agent to do Airbnb?" Have you got any Airbnbs, Peter?
No, but I know you have, Margaret. So I can answer it very briefly, but you have personal experience with this. I have found with whether they be holiday homes or Airbnb, for investment purposes, I'm just better off renting them out full-time, long-term rental rather than holiday rental at Airbnb. But Margaret, you've got much more experience. It's over to you.
Look, whether it's the pandemic or whatever it is, I have a property in Airlie Beach and I have one in Halliday's Point, which is in New South Wales, and both of them are making me significantly more money as an Airbnb. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the pandemic's helping, so people are travelling intrastate in their own state, and I'm getting lots of Queenslanders going to my Airlie Beach property. Mind you, when it wasn't Queenslanders, it was overseas tourists who came there. My Halliday's Point one, I've only been renting that since the pandemic, so I don't really know, but I think it's all about having a property that really lends itself to proper Airbnb. So before you make the decision whether you're going to make it an Airbnb property or not, first of all, how close are you to those tourist spots? Secondly, is your property unique in some way? Does it have something about it that makes people really want to go there? In my case, in Airlie Beach, we have the most magnificent views of the Whitsunday waters. We're very close to the main street. My property is 98% occupied, whereas I know that other Airbnbs, when you look on Airbnb and look at their location, you can see that they're probably only 50% occupied, even during the pandemic. My property in Halliday's Point is probably the best property in the area because it's brand new. We did 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms. It really caters to people who want that luxury beach house, and it's renting exceptionally well. I'm getting way more for it than I could get long-term let. They're the questions you need to ask. Once you can answer those questions in the positive, then it's about whether you want to put it on Airbnb yourself. It is fairly easy to manage on Airbnb if you've got the time. You only need the time in the evenings, really, and you just need a good local cleaner. If you go through an agent to also Airbnb it for you, they will both have their own log of holiday properties and they will list it on Airbnb, but you will pay a fairly hefty fee for that. I know that in the block that I'm in Airlie Beach, I manage my own Airbnb. A neighbour doesn't manage his own Airbnb. He has an agent do it. we have a lot more people renting ours for some reason and a lot less costs than he has. So a lot of questions for you to ask here. But if you don't have something unique that holiday people would really love to come and rent, then I'm with Pete. I definitely go the long-term rent rather than the Airbnb. We also don't know what's going to happen. It's going to cost you a lot to set it up as an Airbnb as well, because you need all the furniture, you need all of the amenities, you've got to keep stock there in a cupboard somewhere so that the cleaner can get to it. There's a lot more to an Airbnb than most people realise. Well, that is all we have time for you this week. And make sure you send the show link to anyone who may be interested in property investing so they can also become educated. Now, if we answered your question tonight, you're the lucky recipient of the 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. But to get it, you need to send an email to pam@mypropertytv.com.au with the subject book prize. Tell me your name and address to send the book to and which question you asked, and we will get it out to you straight away. Thank you to the property professor, Peter Koulizos, for being here tonight, Peter.
Thank you, Margaret. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
And I'm excited about, we look weird on that shot there. I don't know if you can see that. We both look really weird there. So
all right.
If the viewers see that, it's just weird. Not my, back to just me now. It wasn't me because I'm not controlling that particular technology. There you are. Now you're not weird anymore.
Okay.
Peter, I'm excited about the book coming out.
Me too. Can't wait, Margaret. So will people be able to buy it for Christmas?
I'm hoping so, yes. We're very close to getting that published.
Excellent.
And usually it's around about a 3-month turnaround. The book is all about my journey down the property investing road with the property developing road with Peter's help along the way. And boy, Pete, didn't we come across some doozies?
Oh, we did, but it's great. Unfortunately for you, you had a lot of hassles, but it's a reflection of what happens in the real world for mum and dad property developers. Things don't always go smoothly.
Well, it couldn't have been any better for the book because everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong pretty much. And we dealt with them and got out the other side, even though there were many, many times there that I think we were both saying, nah, we need to give it up as a bad idea. But we got there in the end and it all turned out happily. So look out for that book, Diary of a Small Developer. Now, if you want to contact Peter, then you can do so. How can they get in contact with you, Pete?
peter.koulizos@adelaide.edu.au, or just Google my name and you'll find me.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. Now, if you have a question or you want to contact me between shows, you can email me at pam@mypropertytv.com.au or go on to social media, all the usual suspects. I'm on them somewhere. If you'd like some guidance on where you should next be buying property, our fab new service, Property Match, is for you. It allows us to do all the work for you in hunting down that next hotspot. And we have dozens and dozens of clients who are already reaping the benefits of that new service and loving it. Way cheaper than getting a lot of those people who are very hands-on. And we have 25 years experience in investing in property, so you're dealing with the best for sure. Go to our website and give us a call. Have a great week, and I'll see you back here next Tuesday night.
Property Investing Matters was brought to you by Destiny, empowering investors to achieve success through property investment for more than 24 years.
forgetting your property portfolio can be just as bad as never getting started at all. If you're not staying on top of interest rates, loan structures, tax deductions and current rent returns, there's a good chance that your portfolio is underperforming and you're losing money. Whether you have a large property portfolio or you're just starting out, monitoring your properties is just as important as buying them in the first place. Destiny's Finance and Portfolio Monitoring Service will not only oversee your rentals to ensure they're always achieving the best possible return, it will identify when you're ready to invest again and ensure that you always have the best and most cost-effective loan products available. And with more than 25 years of experience and billions of dollars in finance applications completed, you can be sure you're in safe hands with the experts in the business, Destiny.
Go to destiny.com.au to find out more, or give us a call on 1300 My Destiny.